confidence isn't something to aim for. It's a byproduct of being willing to put yourself in the places where you have no confidence and where you feel vulnerable. Even if you lose, you gain the evidence that even when it goes wrong, I can survive it.
Well, Charles, my Dickens, this is the Academy of Imperfection, where experts in their field share their wisdom on the subject of imperfection. Today, we welcome superstar psychologist Dr. Julie Smith to talk about, amongst other things, confidence. So delay that full English breakfast and join students Hugh, Ryan and Josh in the Academy of Imperfection.
Well, everyone, we are very, very excited to bring you today's guest. We are joined by Dr. Julie Smith. For some reason, I feel like I want to give you a nickname. I don't know why. That feels like inappropriate for a psychologist, but I'm feeling the urge, but I won't.
Wow. Go for it. I want to know what was in your mind now.
So do I. I want to know what's the first nickname that comes to mind.
I just thought Smithy. I just felt like
Smithy.
Yeah, I just like, but that's so inappropriate for a doctor and a psychologist.
To be honest, that's what my husband and I call each other, so that works. That's fine.
You've got the same nickname. That's unique.
Well, my husband and I went to school together, so at school he was always called Smithy with all our friends and stuff like that. So every now and then it sort of comes out, or with one of our sons if they're misbehaving. Hey,
well, you
Smithy.
call your sons that as well?
Sometimes.
Oh, you're all Smithies.
Really confusing.
For those of you who don't know who Smithy is, and I mean, if you've heard of the internet, you probably have heard of Smithy. But so Dr. Julie Smith is a clinical psychologist and a world-famous social media presence. She has 2 million followers on Instagram and 5 million followers on TikTok. Her first book, Why Has Nobody Told Me This Before, which aims to provide a simple, positive and practical toolkit for better mental health, was the best-selling non-fiction book of 2022 in the UK, which is an extraordinary achievement.
Wow.
Julia released her second book, Open When, that's the name of the book, Open When, in January this year. And Open When is aimed at fortifying your mental health. It's about what to do when you're really going through the difficult stuff.
It's one of the best, as far as concepts for a book.
Yeah.
It's one of the best ones.
Thank you. Well, it actually came out of a sort of organic idea as well, where the first book was really me trying to sort of organize all this content that I've made for socials. And it was all kind of, but when you put random videos on in random places, it's not in a coherent order or easily kind of accessible. And so I wanted to put it all in a certain order with lots of details so that people could kind of dip in and get the things that they needed. But really they were all kind of concepts and skills that you could kind of learn and work on over time to kind of build your resilience so that when things do happen, you're kind of equipped, ready to go. Whereas I had a lot of stories sort of translated to me, and they were supposed to be compliments, and they were, and it was very nice. But people saying that they found the book so helpful that they were kind of carrying it around with them so that when they were in crisis, they could kind of look, on the pages and work out what to do. And while that was really nice, I just kept thinking, I just didn't really write it for that. This is the sort of tools that, the last thing you need if you're in a crisis is to have someone say, well, you probably should have started mindfulness 6 months ago and then you'd be all right. But because you're not there, are you? You're in the moments. And I think in the intro to Open When, I talk about this idea of, when a hurricane is going to hit in the next few days, a hammer and nails is exactly the tool someone needs to prepare them for what's to come. But when the storm hits, that's no use to them at all. What they need is someone to kind of grab them by the shoulders, look them in the eye and say, we can get through this together. Follow me. Let's do this. And kind of bring the words that you need in that moment to help you emotionally stay calm and focus on the right things and do the right things.
Brilliant.
The one thing I probably should have said in your bio is that, so we have a psychologist on our show here, Dr. M, and all our listeners need to know is that Dr. M is a huge fan of Dr. Julie Smith. So she is Dr. M approved.
Big time.
That's our version of in our little universe, that's the equivalent of being Oprah approved, in my opinion. So
we're definitely not here to talk about my next question, but I'm just you said before you met your husband when you were at school. How old were you when you met your husband?
Yeah.
I find that fascinating.
We must have been like 11, 12, so
Oh.
senior school.
Whoa.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, in science class. And weirdly, so my husband's called Matt, and we live near the town that we grew up, and my daughter goes to school. Has just got into year 7, which is the age that we met. And she came home the other day and she said, I met a boy called Matt in science the other day. And I was like, don't speak to him. Don't speak.
And when did you start dating? Were you at school when you were dating?
Well, that's the running joke as well. We kind of say it took him about 10 years to lock me down because we didn't get together till we were 21. So
Right. So what we thought we might do today with you, so with the new book Open When, there's a whole lot of different topics that when you're going through something in life, you can look it up, as you said before, and you can jump into wherever you're at or whatever sort of problem you're facing in your life, whatever issue you're up against. We had a look through all the chapters, and it's so beautifully written. It's such a wonderful book. And we sort of thought we would, all three of us would come to you with a question on a certain topic. I feel it's like that hypothetical of like, if you, like, I'm not that I'm a religious person, but if you meet God at the pearly gates, you've got like one question you'd ask him. This is like,
It's quite the compliment, Julie.
Don't know where we go from there.
Smithy, no.
this is
From
like,
Smithy to God. So, pretty special guest on the podcast today. We have God.
I'm going to tell my husband that my nickname has changed.
I feel embarrassingly unprepared now that I know that.
so we're at the pearly, well, maybe the pearly whites. We've found ourselves at the pearly
Yeah.
whites, and we've all got a question each that we've come to you with. So I might kick it off if it's okay.
Okay.
And just a quick story before I get to my question. So I guess the topic I want to talk to you about is if you're feeling overwhelmed. As I mentioned to you before, we have neurodiversity in our family than our kids. And by the end of last year, I think a lot of people feel overwhelmed by the end of last year. I don't know how you have 3 kids as well, so I don't know if you feel this as well, but sometimes at the start of the workday, when you get to work, you feel like you've already done an entire day's worth of life. We had a day last year where I was up at 5 with our 2-year-old he just got up really early, and I don't know why, but he was in such a bad mood. And then I was getting lunch ready for the 2 other kids for kinder in school. That was happening before 6, and then we have a nanny who sometimes comes and helps. She called and said, I can't get there today. And then I had so getting our son to school is very, very difficult. My wife left with him. I had the other 2. So I had to wait for someone to come over and do the organising a babysitter last minute. And I got my daughter to kinder, and she just had this huge, she was so shattered that I was leaving and cried for so long, which she never usually does. So I'd been up for 4 hours before I even got to work, dealing with so much emotion, so much big emotion from all these little people, and trying to problem solve and get people over to help. I was so exhausted by the time I got to work. And the overwhelm that I felt was just from the whole year. Just felt like everything was just crashing down, and I just had so little emotional capacity to I've even found like I walked in, everyone's saying hi, good morning, hey. I found it very hard to even talk to people. I was so exhausted and so overwhelmed. And so my question to you is, when you're in that moment and you just feel like you're completely overwhelmed, but you're in a public space. When I say public space, you're at work or you're around people socially. When life feels too hard and you're overwhelmed, what's your advice to people in those times?
Yeah, I think the sort of biggest thing that comes to mind straight away is how we view that overwhelm. So I think lots of people, when they feel it, because we all find ourselves there at various points depending on what's going on for us at the time, right? And so it's very human, but a lot of us then judge ourselves for having it. So we think that feeling says something about who we are as a person or how we're doing it as a person, and often judge ourselves on our ability to cope as if that's somehow a measure of coping, when actually overwhelm is an experience and one that's filled with information about our needs. And when we see it like that, so if, even whether you're in a private workplace or you're surrounded in people, seeing it as information means that you're able to acknowledge it and be with it and listen to what it says. The trouble is with painful feelings is as soon as we are not wanting to have them, or we try to push them down to be able to function and do what we need to do, which so many of us do all the time, right? We're numbing it. And when we numb it, we can't listen to what it has to say. And when we're willing to sort of turn towards it, what we can ask ourselves is, what is this telling me that I need? What do I need right now? And the feeling can often answer that question. In that situation where you're, just totally exhausted, totally kind of overstimulated, dealing with big emotions, then possibly the answer in some situations is you need some time out, you need a break, you need a breather to kind of bring your nervous system back down to calm again. Or for other people, it might be a different answer. So I'd be interested to know what you did in that situation and whether it helped or not.
Well, I think it was also looking forward into my day and realizing that I just had no time to have a break at all. And I felt like it already felt like dinner time. It already felt like it was time to start going for dinner, and I just got to work. So I probably bottled it, and which I probably the most healthy thing to do, but that's kind of what I felt like that was my only option at the time. But just hearing you say that it's like dealing with it, taking it as information, I think just as soon as you said that already was very helpful, because I feel like I don't reckon I would have reflected on it as a this is like data acquisition. I would have just thought at the end of the day, this is just ridiculous. My life is just so ridiculous at the moment. And then continued to just go through the same struggle rather than spending time to go, what can I do here?
The thing that popped into my mind when you said it's just information, Julie, was like, I'm imagining a situation of you getting to work, Hugh, and if the information that was in your mind when you got to work was like, I need to go to the bathroom, then you would happily say to the people at work, I know we've got a meeting, but I just need 5 minutes to go to the bathroom.
Yeah.
And you would go there, do your business and come into the meeting and no one would care. But it's sort of the same to say, I just need 5 minutes to myself.
Yeah.
You could even use the excuse bathroom, but it feels to me like they're both just information that could benefit from 5 minutes of attention.
Yeah.
Does that work? Does that kind of framing work, Julie?
It's so true, isn't it? It makes me think of how I used to envy all the people that smoked in an office.
Oh,
because
yes.
they got to go out every sort of hour for 5 minutes and just
And
get
also
a
the
breather.
health benefits that they get from it.
Yeah, I say take a breather. Probably one of the healthiest breath there. And that's similar, isn't it, to if you have a day where you are so overwhelmed with stress, or something sort of on that emotional scale, that I think most people who recognized that they needed to take a day off work for it would probably call in and say they had something physical wrong with them.
Yeah.
Because it feels more valid.
Yeah.
And that's not because it is more valid, but it's just
More accepted.
a whole host of reasons around fearing judgment and stuff like that.
Yeah, I reckon there's a lot of fear of making it awkward. If I turn up and go, I need 5 minutes, it's like, I feel like everyone's going to go, oh, geez, what's wrong with them, sort of thing, rather than it being an acceptable thing to do and going, don't worry, I'm fine. I just need 5 minutes to get myself up a couple of grades in my ability to go.
Yeah. And there's something about those in-between moments when we talk to people about kind of stress management and stuff, and how, society is just set up as it is today, and we're trying to sort of function within it, but it doesn't necessarily fit with how we're supposed to function. And so we talk about kind of taking back the in-between moments of like, if you've got half an hour to have some lunch, you're probably going to sit at your emails and check emails while you're having a sandwich or something. And what you're doing is kind of, ping, 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 more stress response going off with, you're just basically going through your to-do list when you haven't really got time to address any of them. Whereas if you took that time and, stood outside with a sandwich in the sunshine for you guys, isn't it? Not for us. But if you can kind of, take that moment to just do nothing, or go, if you have 15 minutes before your next meeting, what would it be like if instead of, checking Slack or whatever it is you've got on your phone, you went out to your car, reclined the seat and just sat there in silence for 5 of those 15 minutes. it doesn't take very long to feel slightly replenished, so that you then go into your next part of the day feeling like you're not completely running on empty. When you're dealing with huge overwhelm like that and big things, I don't think that fixes any of it. But as a kind of day-to-day thing, taking those in between moments makes a huge difference.
I wonder whether, and apologies if I absolutely nailed this, but I wonder if, like, for you, because such a big, from what I can tell about you, and I think what everyone knows about you, is that you love lifting people up. And like, I think you've talked about this before, like since you were a kid, you've almost seen it as like your role to bring joy to people and to like be the brightness in people's life. So then when you're really overwhelmed and you don't feel like you can do that, I wonder if that like adds to the overwhelm, that you're not able to be the person that you want to be.
Apology accepted. Yeah.
And sorry to you, Julie. Sorry that I absolutely nailed that.
I'll get my coat.
Yeah, I'd never thought of that, but it's to me, I find it incredibly overwhelming and also quite upsetting when I can't do it for my own kids. Like my entire like life I feel like that's kind of been what I've been doing, and then when I cannot lift my kids, it's just, I hate it. I feel so. There's a couple of times people come up to me and say, "Oh, my son read your book, and it really helped him. It's been really big for him." And I just think, "Oh, that's great," but I can't even help my own kids. Like, and I get really down about that. And I think that kind of overwhelm is something that I experience a lot when I see my daughter really upset when I drop her off at kinder, and she just wants me to sit with her for half an hour or for 15 minutes at kinder to watch her paint or whatever she's doing. And I have to go, "No, I've got to go." I do get very emotionally overwhelmed by that. Yeah. Well, very well done. Very good.
Just chop it up into a promo. All good.
And it's interesting that, like you say, that has been a part of your role in your kind of childhood and your family life, and then it's something that you now see as something that you expect of yourself with everybody, even small children. Do you have an understanding about why that was?
Yes.
Why it even started?
Yeah, well, we've talked about it a fair bit on this podcast. Our sister Georgia was really unwell with anorexia, and so it started with trying to sort of bring some joy to the family, and then it snowballed from there.
Yeah, and I think that's really key to this stuff, is because in that moment, we don't need to do anything drastic. What we need is to kind of hold something like an expectation or a set of thoughts or feelings at arm's length. And sometimes in therapy we talk about this idea of thoughts and feelings when it's the only narrative that we're listening to. It's like having your hand over your eyes. It's kind of, that's all you can see is whatever you're feeling in that moment. And this process of what we call diffusion, where you kind of just pull it back to arm's length, and that gives you the option to kind of see it for what it is. And it's one perspective, it's one possible way of looking at this situation. That, okay, there's my expectation that when someone is in distress or upset and uncomfortable, that I expect myself to fix it and make it go away. And that's not always achievable, not because of any inadequacies of mine, but because actually that's someone else's emotions. And when I think about it, it relates to sort of my experiences as a kind of early trainee, where you get in the room with someone and they kind of tell you all these really complex problems, and you think, oh my goodness, how am I going to, fix all of this? And the reality is you don't fix it. That person fixes it. And often what fixes it is being able to sit with someone in their distress and just contain it. You don't have to make it go away. It has to run its natural course. And so even with our children, it's just, I relate, it's just incredibly painful to sit with your own children when they're in distress and to be with it. So painful, because you feel it's a sort of it reverberates through your own body and they feel like an extension of you. And yet the most powerful thing we can do is teach them that it's okay to experience those feelings, and that if we comfort each other through them and soothe our way through them, those feelings pass. And then we don't need to fear the feelings. Whereas if we actually kind of make them all go away and squash them all, or pretend they're not happening, or numb them or something, then we're kind of almost also giving the message that it's not okay to feel those things, or that they won't go away by themselves if this person doesn't make them go away for me. And so by allowing someone to sit in their distress and kind of soothing their way, soothing them through it, but not forcing it away, we're actually empowering them to learn the skills they need to do that independently later on.
That is really good.
Really
good.
It's brilliant. Something occurred to me when you were talking about it, in that we've had Missy Higgins on the show a couple of times. Missy Higgins, for your knowledge, Julie, is a huge Australian artist, musician who's released many songs. She's a bit of an icon in Australia. She talked about how the people that never want to hear her play music or sing are her kids, and how she thought she was going to have this parenting journey of playing them beautiful songs and singing together, and they all tell her to shut up and stop playing music. And I think about your ability to bring joy to other people and make them laugh is kind of like Missy Higgins playing music. It's one of your great skills, and it doesn't always work with your kids where it works with other people. And I wanted to ask you a question, Julie, and if you don't want to go here, that's fine, just it's too personal. But as a psychologist, you would know all the tricks in the book. Do they work with your kids, and how does it feel for you when you're sitting with your children and maybe that the things that you know should work aren't working?
Yeah. I mean, it's a minefield, isn't it? Because in some ways you're kind of setting yourself up to think, I need to do this perfectly. I've got all these tools, I need to use them. And I love it when my son looks at me, he's like, don't give me that Dr. Julie stuff now. So no, it doesn't work.
There should be a chapter in the book that says, that's like open when you're the author of Open When and you still don't know what to do.
Even when your mum's Dr. Julie and you're fed up with it. I think inevitably it's so difficult when it's your own children. When I'm sat in therapy with someone, there's these set of rules and structures, and while it's the most incredible relationship you build up with someone and you get to know them in this really beautiful way, there are lots of boundaries that are really clear, and you're sort of working through in this very professional way. Whereas when you're with your child, when they show distress, you feel that with them in such a visceral way. Or when they're doing something, you probably see it as your own mistake, or that something, if they're struggling, I must be getting this wrong if they're struggling with this, or if they're misbehaving in that way, that's something I've done wrong. Or, it's so, you're also kind of entangled together because you're parenting them. It's so much more messy, and I make just as many mistakes as everybody else, for sure.
Reassuring to hear.
Julie, I wonder if because there's a chapter that I'd love to ask you about as well. One of your chapters is open when you doubt yourself and want to feel more confident. And I think like that is something that really resonated with me, and that chapter really resonated with me. A lot of the stuff was really helpful because I do the podcast obviously, but then in another part of my life, I do writing on television, and I work in TV and do different projects like that. And often that involves like working in like a room of other writers or other producers or whatever, and it's like a brainstorming situation. Or any sort of creative chat. And I've always had like a real confidence problem in those kind of group collaborative, not so much in this environment, to be honest, like with these guys and this team. But in most other situations, I have a real confidence issue. And not necessarily because I think my ability, generally speaking, is like low. I don't generally have a low confidence. But in specific situations, particularly in a brainstorming room, I first of all don't think if someone else, which is usually the case, someone else is like quicker, like thinks quicker than me and has ideas quicker than me, I get like intimidated. But then the other part of it that is kind of like a bit sort of embarrassing or a bit shameful or something. But if I like get the courage to like say an idea, like put myself out there and say like an idea that I think is good, if that gets either criticized or shut down, maybe fairly, but if it gets shut down, like I feel like I've been sort of told, no, you're not good at this. That's how I feel. It's almost like you don't belong here. And then my response to that, more often than not, is to kind of go silent and it's almost like I'm unconsciously punishing everyone for like shutting me down in a weird way. And then on the odd occasion when I was like really analyzing this behavior when knowing I was going to talk to you, I realized that what I also sometimes do, and this is horrible, I don't do this all the time, but I know I do it sometimes, is if one of my ideas has been criticized and I start going silent, I will start being unfairly critical of other people's ideas. So I'm not the only one who's coming up with bad ideas. And then it's so mad, like to do that, and it's weird to say it, and it's weird, but I do it, and I just wanted to bring that up with you and just ask you, why do I do that?
Well, it's interesting, isn't it? Because when you sort of almost didn't want to say it because you clearly sort of judge yourself for it, for doing it. And often what happens in therapy, so if we're kind of talking in a therapeutic situation and someone sort of feels judgmental about something they've done or the way that they behave, often what happens is there's just this turning around of, okay, let's park the judgment and let's look at that with curiosity. Turn towards it with curiosity. That's really interesting. What's going on there? And because I'm guessing you seem to have lots of insight. I'm guessing you kind of have a sense of what that's about.
Yeah, so that's another bit in that chapter that I actually I highlighted when I read it, which was that be curious as to why your confidence is low or why I'm doing that. And I have a sense as to why I might be doing it. But I feel like I'm literally like doing therapy at the moment where I feel like I'm literally drilling into this exact thing. So I'm not quite at the end of, I don't actually know why I'm doing it. But that question, the why, is kind of where it gets a bit like confronting, because it's like, oh God, what's at the heart of that? Or hopefully, whose fault is it? And then at least I have someone to blame.
Well, that's the thing, is that when you look at the why around the behavior, so kind of pushing people away in terms of criticizing their ideas or withdrawing, those are already protective things, right? It's either I withdraw and hide away, or I come at you. They're both really protective. So you're feeling really vulnerable, which makes sense, because when someone criticizes a part of your contribution, that feels personally and psychologically really threatening if you also attach it to your own measure of your kind of self-worth or your estimation of yourself.
Yeah.
So if you think that my tiny little failure of suggesting this, that, or the other in this project says something about who I am as a person, then I'm really attached to this idea because it's part of who I am, or it says something about who I am if everyone doesn't like it. Whereas when we have that separation between me and my sort of self-worth and who I know I am and how much I care for myself, if that's very separate to the idea, then it's much easier to deal with the criticism of the idea, because it's not also a criticism of you. It's an idea you can either have or throw away.
I think you saying that has sort of reminded me of the little realization I had recently about myself, which is that I think so much of and this is a big thing that I will need to really work on, but such a big part of my self-worth is tied up in my ability to have good ideas and to be like creative, or to think of interesting things, or to make something good. And I know that that's a very dangerous place for my self-worth to lie in, but that is where it mainly is. And so I guess even just saying that out loud and you saying that makes me realize that, well, yeah, of course, when someone criticizes the one thing where my self-worth lies in, then it's like, of course, then I feel like my self-worth goes down because the thing that I value is being criticized. Yeah.
And then I guess there's two avenues there, isn't there? There's, one road is, okay, you begin to try and separate your sense of self-worth from the idea of kind of having lots of good ideas and things like that's not the entirety of who you are. And then there's this other route of, having great ideas is a big part of what I value in myself. And a part of having good ideas, a necessary part of having good ideas, is having a bunch of not so good ones and being able to shift through them. And there's a great a speech, who was it? It was a tennis player, one of the greats that I saw a while ago. He did a speech and he was talking about, and I saved it for my son who always struggles with it. He loves playing football and finds it difficult when, he's very competitive. So if he misses or he kind of makes a few mistakes, he just gets really, really upset. And this tennis player was talking about how one of his greatest skills, he's known as one of the best of all time, but one of his greatest skills was being able to do a bad shot that wasn't adequate or wasn't gonna, win the game, and then being able to leave it behind and only focus on the next shot. And he said that was his most important skill, because without it, unless he was able to leave that shot behind, he wasn't able to fully give himself to the next shot, which every shot demands his whole self. So there's this kind of, this idea that, failure is a part of success and all that, but also the idea that failure is an experience. It's not who you become. It's something you go through and then learn from. And so there's something in there about kind of dealing with a relationship with failure and recognizing that it's very separate to the person. It's an experience you go through. And even more so, if you see yourself as someone with lots of successful ideas, then you would have to experience more of the bad ideas to get to those. So there's a whole kind of narrative there that probably needs playing with and adopting to, because they're always going to be bad. If you're having ideas and you're working on ideas, you're always going to experience a few that you don't like or other people don't like. And so, it's probably a longer piece of work to deal with separating that from your sense of self-worth. But there's something, probably a shorter piece of work to be done around failure.
Yeah. I think I've, over time, told myself and told others that I don't like brainstorm rooms. Like I avoid that environment and tend to just sort of, whenever possible, just do work on my own. And I'll almost like brainstorm with myself. And actually, I've never thought about this, but my favorite type of brainstorming, this is sick. My favorite type of brainstorming is talking to myself on voice memo. And the reason that I like talking through ideas on voice memo, I think, is because no one can criticize me. Like the voice memo doesn't talk back. And so I've always, as much as I can, I'll try and work through, if I have an idea, I'll try and work through it myself and try and pressure test it as much as I can. So when I eventually present it to other people, I've thought of all the as many as I can. I've kind of like thought of all the possible pressure points, and then I'll have answers to it. Because the thought of presenting an idea too early means that someone could criticize it, which is obviously fine, but actually to me that feels like terrifying. That it could like get shut down too early, or I haven't had the chance to properly work it through. So I think, I think probably from what you're saying, I think the thing I need to do is probably sit in the discomfort of like sharing ideas earlier when they're very, very, in the very early days of life, essentially, knowing that they might get better from other people chipping in, or even if someone says, oh, I don't like that, that doesn't mean that I'm bad at things. It just means that that idea needs a bit more work. And I remember someone actually said to me a long time ago, and this is probably advice I should take, but people are not their ideas. Because often I think what I do about myself and for others, if I have an idea and someone says that's a bad idea, I feel like they're coming at me as opposed to my idea. And then I've caught myself when other people have like an idea which I think is terrible, I'll judge them, not the idea, which is horrible.
I think I suffer from a thing where I have a really high value of ideas and good ideas and new ideas and creative ideas. And I think I don't have any. And every time someone criticizes me, it's confirmation of my internal belief that I don't have any good ideas. But I feel like the self-worth thing is sort of, I don't know if it's possible to have like compartmentalized self-worth, because I feel like in some areas of my life I have pretty good self-worth and I know that I contribute and have value and all that kind of stuff. But in that particular area, it's like a little compartment of my self-worth that is ready for it to be confirmed that there's not much there. Yeah. And it's that's something other people have.
And is it, because I relate to that a little bit, and it's almost like when I'm in that mindset, it's almost like the idea that I'm saying is laced with that belief. And it's like there's just no confidence in saying the idea.
Yeah,
so it's like,
you're probably going to think this is
shit, but I got this stupid idea, but anyway, it's probably going to fail, and I hate it. I hate this idea, but what do you reckon of this?
Yeah.
And there's something about that from, it actually comes from sort of couples therapy stuff where when you're arguing with someone, shifting from, fighting against each other and kind of rather than seeing the other person as the problem, you see the problem as the disagreement, and there's you two working together to face the problem. And so you kind of get this shift of actually we're a team, we're not competing with each other now. It's us and the problem, and we're going to tackle it together. And it made me think of that when you're thinking kind of, people in a room and everyone's throwing out ideas. And because the reality is probably most people around that table are feeling fairly similar about their own ideas and feeling vulnerable to kind of say it out loud. And when you kind of have some kind of agreement in a situation where you're both going to throw ideas out and some of them are going to be better than others, and it's just a pooling of ideas, that feels kind of fundamentally different. It's definitely, me and my husband do that when we're kind of coming up with ideas or scripting for videos and stuff like that. It's so, especially in that kind of scenario where you're so comfortable with someone, it's all too easy to kind of not be that polite about stuff. And so we have to be clear that, this isn't us. There are lots of terrible videos and ideas that we've come up with that we've parked, but they're not representative of us. They're representative of our creative process. And you have to bin a few things along the way to get to, the really good stuff. And, you don't judge. What was it? Who was the guy that invented the light bulb? Is it Edison?
Edison.
No one judges him for his, 1,000 attempts before he made it. We just remember him for what he got to in the end, but he wouldn't have got there without the previous ones. And so kind of seeing all of those kind of second-rate ideas as stepping stones to better things, sees that suddenly you kind of shift your view of them as a necessary part of the process. This one isn't there yet, but what could that lead me to? And just, always allowing yourself that kind of separation. I know it's really easy to kind of sit here and say, and really hard to do in the moment, because I think criticism always stings.
Yeah, and the part of that that Edison example, I don't know Edison's story, but and he might have just done that all by himself, but there's potentially there was a bunch of people helping him figure out I don't know. But I think what a lot of us, I definitely struggle with, and a lot of us struggle with, is yes, we're a team, but God, it would be cool if I was the one credited with the idea. God, it would be cool if if at the end of this, we could all say, oh yeah, we all worked on it, but God, it'd be cool if you were like
Edison.
Edison, he's like, I came up with it, but yeah, we all worked on it, but it was my idea. It's like that praise, or that having the credit literally for the thing, because it is important for a lot of people, I guess, in their jobs to be the one that the boss goes, oh well, that was their idea and good job, Jenny, awesome, as opposed to just going, oh, the team came up with it. I feel like that takes a lot of selflessness from everyone to buy into that. That's the dream. but it's very, very difficult in the moment. I think when you might be like, you need to get you need a raise, or you want to keep your job, or they're making cuts in the company and you like want to stand out. Like, I think that's where it gets tricky.
And I was just wondering if you had the recognition one day, do you think it would change the belief?
You got me. Yeah, no. I mean, I guess that's the thing about the minuscule amount of stuff I know about like ego, is that it's like this bottomless well, isn't it? That you can never, doesn't matter how many like pats on the back or awards that I get, it'll probably just like grow it. It'll probably just make that want or that desire grow, is my guess. And I'll just continue to want it.
Yeah, it's really interesting actually. When I first sort of got the book deal, I was just thinking, oh my goodness, how have I managed to convince them I can write a book? And this is, terrifying, but also a dream come true. And I loved the process once I kind of managed to get over myself in the moment and think, okay, I'm just going to start writing, and then I've got something to edit. And so enjoyed the process of the writing. And because I had no idea what success would look like, what that meant in terms of numbers or anything like that. And I just never imagined for a minute it would get into the Sunday Times or that kind of stuff. So every success was then kind of a surprise. But the second time round, because the first book was so sort of wildly, sort of 1 million copies, that kind of thing, it was just insane. But because of that, I would say I almost enjoyed the second time less, because there was that, well, now I'm the person who's got to bring out a Sunday Times bestseller, 1 million copy, whatever, 40 languages. If it doesn't, everyone's going to think, and then I started to attach that to, people will think that says something about me. And inevitably, the more people I spoke to, the more I realized they weren't really thinking about it at all. It was, in me. But it's interesting, isn't it, that we kind of imagine when there's success, we'll feel better. And actually, we probably feel a little bit worse because then we put ourselves under pressure to stay there.
So I'm going to go ahead and guess that in relation to Ryan's question there, that it's quite a common thing for people to come into therapy to you and say, I just wish I had more confidence, or how do I get more confidence? Is there something that you say to that question specifically?
Yeah. I mean, if it's a sort of situation specific thing. So if someone's saying there's this thing and I want to get better at it, but I feel like I'm no good at it, then we talk about ideas around, the thing that you do every day becomes your comfort zone. So you can't sit in the therapy room and convince yourself to be more confident. And, and people say, look in the mirror and tell yourself you're feeling confident. It just, it doesn't work like that. Your brain learns through evidence of action. And so anything that's new or novel and unpredictable for your brain will cause your brain to set off a stress response. And that's really because your brain is saying that I can't predict this. I can't automate it for you. You need this level of alertness so that you can be aware of what's going on and respond to it. And that's fine, but that's a big energy resource. So when you've done that a few times and your brain is kind of, okay, we know what we're doing here. I know I can kind of survive this situation. Then it doesn't bring such a big stress response. You start to kind of habituate to that situation and you become calmer through it. So I worked with people in my NHS years who, hadn't left the house in several years through agoraphobia and things like that. And how we would do that is we wouldn't just kind of stroll out the door and, go into town. I spent weeks on a doorstep with someone, just sitting on the doorstep and looking out and being there until being there became the comfort zone. And then we go a little further and then we go a little further. And so, confidence isn't something to aim for. It's a byproduct of being willing to put yourself in the places where you have no confidence and where you feel vulnerable, but being willing to be the beginner and being willing to, make the mistakes or have, downfalls along the way. Because even, whether you win or lose, when you have volunteered to put yourself in that position, you gain anyway, because even if you lose, you gain the evidence that even when it goes wrong, I can survive it and I can get through it, and it's not as bad as I anticipated. So, and that sort of incrementally builds this sort of confidence in that situation over time, but it doesn't necessarily always translate. So, if I came along to, a script writing room, I would feel totally out of my depth and not know what I was doing and feel vulnerable. Whereas if I brought you to a mental health hospital, you might feel really out of your depth, and I would kind of be more aware of what I was doing. And that's just through that kind of experience. So confidence can be really situation specific. And so it's really important to be aware of that, but always be then stepping outside of the comfort zone, and because it will grow with you the more time you spend outside of it.
That is so helpful. I think just bring it back to me, which I'm really good at. I think like what I hear in terms of my situation is like, I think it's just like putting myself, I need to collaborate with people more, because it feels like, especially in like a writing in an ideas phase when things are being birthed. I think I just need to lean into that discomfort a little bit more and just do it more, so it doesn't feel so scary.
Yeah, sounds good.
I want to circle back to something we talked about earlier, which is Overwhelm, and what it's led to for me in the past. But before we do, I'd never realized that something you mentioned before about the problem. And so last year I committed to playing I've always wanted to play a gig of original music, and it's a long story why it hasn't happened, but there was a lot of confidence issues and the fear of bad ideas and being judged and all that kind of stuff. And last year I decided to just announce on the podcast that I was going to do a gig and give, without any songs written, and give sort of 8 weeks to write the songs and pull a band together and do it. And I pulled together a band of people that I've always wanted to play music with, that I've been very intimidated by musically, who I love as people, good friends, but musically very intimidating. And I found myself saying to one of them that I trust a lot, that this feels more comfortable, because it's like I've created a problem here that we all have to solve. Like, there's people have bought tickets, they've sold, we're going to have to play this show. And it was no longer a judgment of whether my ideas were good or not. It was more, we've got a problem and we all have to kind of solve this as a team and get up there and play a show. And it was such a rewarding experience. But I'd never realized what I was doing was what you mentioned before, which was sort of taking the problem and externalizing it and putting it there. And so it was no longer an ego thing.
Yeah. And then did it feel kind of easier to work on without feeling so vulnerable?
Yeah, it felt great. It was no longer vulnerable because there was so much time pressure, and there was no choice but to be. I just had to put things out there before. I shared things that previous to that I would never share anything with anyone because it had to be perfect in my mind. But now I had no choice, because if I didn't share things, and a few of the guys in the band were very kind to say, like, we don't care what stage they're at. We just need to start hearing them, because if we don't hear them now, we're not going to have any songs for this gig. And obviously a lot of credit goes to them for how kind they were in working and working together. They're just framing as it a problem rather than a creative self-indulgence.
Yeah. And there's something about that shifts you from constantly trying to kind of measure your own self-worth and being on your own head to this kind of outward focus towards, how can I contribute? How can I contribute? Rather than constantly evaluating how good that contribution is, you're just trying to do your part. And I imagine, and because I remember you said before about that you didn't really feel that vulnerable in this situation with these guys. And I wonder if that's sort of similar there, where it's because you're not sort of wondering whether you measure up or not. You're just all pooling ideas and all trying to contribute. And there's that kind of shift from perspective, isn't it? The more time we spend in our minds, the more miserable we get, really. And when we're just focused on what we can do to contribute, it shifts everything.
It's definitely a great framework of looking at it. I find myself in this group that 95% of the time I feel like that, but every now and then, because I feel so honoured to work with such brilliant people with such great brains, I do feel a bit inadequate a lot of the time. And not a lot of the time, some of the time I feel a bit inadequate in my ideas.
Yeah, and I was just thinking there were kind of, I heard someone before sort of reframing that kind of perspective where, when you're in a situation and you feel, or you're sort of narrative is that you're somehow the most inadequate in the room, or you don't have, ideas that are as good as everybody else's, or you're not as experienced as other people, those kind of things. When you kind of reframe that to the person in the room with the best opportunity to learn and grow and benefit is that person that is potentially in that situation. If you're the most experienced person in the room with all the best ideas, then it's not really the best place to be in some respects. If you're trying to kind of hone your craft and build your skills and get better at what you do, then you want to be surrounded in people who you feel do it better than you, so that you can learn from them. And that's still the same scenario, but just reframed in a slightly different way. It feels fundamentally different.
That really resonates, that because it sort of laces it with hope rather than self-doubt. Hope and sort of it's a very future-looking sort of growth mindset, don't they say? Some people say. Yeah. I wanted to circle back on Hugh's discussion of overwhelm, because I've had experiences in the past where I think overwhelm has led to pointlessness. And I think to give a brief moment in time where this happened, and I still feel pointless in the face of this. So I don't know how to reconcile it. But when I was much younger, a lot younger, I was about 23 or something, my wife and I went to live in Bangladesh. She got a job there, and I didn't have a job. I sort of floated around and just experiencing the country. And then I got an opportunity to work for a little bit. I was a photographer at the time, and got a job taking photos for the World Food Program, the UN World Food Program. And there was a job where they're like, there was a flood down south in Bangladesh, a huge humanitarian crisis. And they wanted me to go and take photos. And they said, we've got 2 food drops where we're giving out wheat and other food to people. And we went to one, and there was a few people there. They had heaps of food, and only a few people turned up. And I took photos, and it was all fine. Then they said, we're going to go to the next one, but we think there might be more people there than we'd planned for. And we got there, and there was so many thousands and thousands and thousands of desperate people, and they didn't have they didn't have anywhere near enough food. And it was just desperate people at their absolute worst point in their life, trying to get food. Yeah, a few people yelling at me. I was told to take photos, but then people yelling at me to stop taking photos. It was a really distressing scene, because I was overwhelmed by what I was presented with. I don't think I'll ever forget it. But I also my presence just felt pointless. And then it made me question we're in Bangladesh, and I just felt it was the beginning of this sort of stacking and layering of acknowledgement of how big the world is, how much distress and how much pain and how much suffering there is in the world, and how little I can do, and how pointless my life is in the face of that. And I've never really known how to reconcile that, because I think I feel a sense of purpose in my own life and in my own world. But when I start to engage, and now in 2025, there's a lot to be concerned about in the world. And when I start to engage with that, I find it too overwhelming, and it leads to this feeling of pointlessness. And I'm ashamed of it, because it feels like a cowardly act, and it's also an act coming from an incredible place of privilege. But I find that my only coping mechanism at the moment is almost to just put my head in the sand and pretend it's not happening. And you write beautifully in the book about pointlessness, but I wanted to sort of put that out there as an experience I've had, and how to reconcile that feeling, really.
Yeah, and it sounds like a hugely life-changing kind of experience that sort of changed you and stuck with you.
Absolutely. Yeah. It was a very impactful realization of how lucky and beautiful my life is and has been. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And did it change you in any way, do you think?
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, yeah, absolutely. I mean, it changed me in the fact that it was humbling. It changed me, I think, for the worse for quite a while, in that I just found engaging with life a lot harder. And I think by the end of that year in Bangladesh, I burnt out a lot. I think I didn't really, I had that job for about a month, but I was also just floating around, walking around Bangladesh, being confronted with imagery as confronting as that almost daily. Maybe not as confronting as that, but different imagery that is, anyone that's been to that part of the world knows that there's a lot of distressful things. So there was I think because I didn't have a job and I didn't have anything to do, I was just sort of floating around being hit with this stuff all the time. But it also made me feel that, and I hate this part of myself, but it also made me feel like I'm not sure I can do much to change the suffering of people in the world.
Yeah. And there's that sense, isn't there, of it being about the particular job that you had to do at that point, that you were asked to do, that you didn't feel that it was a contribution.
No, not at all. But it was, no, it didn't, because I guess the point of that job is to document the good work that's being done to send around the world so people can contribute money and help and validate the work that's being done and create more work. But there was nothing, no photos of that day was going to help anyone. So I was just sort of out of my depth and had no purpose at that moment. Yeah.
So it almost feels as though there's this sort of this urgent catastrophe really in front of you. And so that sets off all the alarm bells of, I need to do something now to help this. But the particular role that you were asked to do, although will have helped in the long run of getting people to make donations or that kind of thing, it's like there's sort of there being an emergency and you being sent off to do something that is not helping the emergency right now. It's something that's a sort of for later.
Yeah, you know what? I think maybe it, what it did? I think maybe when you said it changed me, I think maybe it made me, I think I grow up thinking I'd always want to be the person in an emergency that's like really great and like jumps in and acts and does something. And I think it made me feel like, oh no, maybe you're the person who does nothing and doesn't help. Yeah.
Okay, so you judged yourself for the role that you had to take.
Yeah.
Despite it not being your choice.
Yeah, and also like there really wasn't much I could do in that situation. Realistically there was not anything I could do, but I think it provided me with an internal belief that, oh yeah, you're a freeze rather than an act person in a moment of crisis or importance. Okay,
so it sort of fundamentally changed how you viewed yourself.
I think so, yeah.
Yeah.
In a negative way.
Yeah, which really sort of rings true to some of the definitions of trauma, really. That and I don't think that's a sort of overestimation when you, the rest of us can only kind of imagine the kind of scenes that you were faced with, and that when that shifts your fundamental view of the world or how you see yourself within it, that can be pretty huge. I mean, does it dominate your sort of thought processes now day to day?
Well, I think I wouldn't say it dominates my thought process. It's more that because so much of my time is focused on work and bringing up kids, and I feel like have value and contribute. And I know my role there, but in the face of anything bigger that outside myself or crisis or issue, I think, well, there's nothing I can do. And it does, it as a default position of like, I'm pointless or useless in the face of that.
Yeah. There's kind of that idea that where there's nothing I can do, or there's the judgment that anything I do is not enough, therefore that's pointless.
I think it's the latter. Yeah. Anything I do is not enough. So therefore rendered pointless. Yeah.
What would you have to do you think, to give some meaning to the fact that you experienced that and you witnessed it? The rest of us in the room, can only imagine and haven't witnessed that. But the fact that you have, and the fact that you can't see meaning in something today doesn't mean there's none to be found, right?
Yeah.
And so I'm just wondering, what do you imagine? And this might be an answer that you don't have today, but is something to think about over time. But I wonder what you would have to do or consider or think about in order for that experience to have some meaning for you to value it.
I think that is a great question. And as you said, probably one that I need to think deeply about, because I think it would have to be something that really resonated as an action that helped. I'm not sure. Yeah.
And I guess it's this idea that, when I said, we can't always find the meaning, but it doesn't mean it's not there to be found. And sometimes those sorts of things don't come straight away either. It's as we go through life and we have other experiences, things start to kind of piece together, or we go back to something and find a way of making your suffering worthwhile, which really is the point, isn't it? That caused you, to see it, witnessing other people's catastrophe caused you huge suffering, and sounds like it continues to have an impact on you.
I guess I don't put enough emphasis on the positive. A positive of it is that I think something being humbling can be incredibly positive, in that it gives me a realistic and humbling view of my place and of luck and love and safety in the world.
And that sounds really relevant, because when you think about a sense of purpose and meaning in the world, then how can you really have a good grasp on meaning and purpose if you don't know what the opposite is? And you've glimpsed the darkness that can come with feeling that sense of pointlessness. And you know that it doesn't really lead to good places for you in terms of, but you have also gained from that experience in terms of, like you say, that sense of a place in the world and being humble. And I imagine sort of not feeling entitled and all of those sorts of things. And so it starts to shape you into someone. And I imagine over time you will find a way for that to shape you in a way that enables you to live in line with the values that has crafted for you.
Yeah. With linking it to purpose, do you have to have, because purpose is something that's talked about a lot and you've written about beautifully, but I don't think I've ever been able to define my purpose. Do you think you have to know who you are, have a very good sense of who you are to be able to define your purpose, or can it sort of come the other way around?
I think the way that people talk about purpose is somehow kind of like we could all generate one sentence about our life's purpose, and that would be it. And I don't think it is that way. I think it's something we discover through the contribution we try to make, and that there is purpose in what you're doing here with these guys, and there's purpose in what you do at home with your family and your kids, and in your community and your other work and all these other things that, there's purpose in all of it, but it's generated out of that contribution and the kind of person you're trying to be and who you're trying to show up as. And inevitably all of your experiences will have contributed to what that is today. And all of your continued experiences will continue to craft that and shape you in that way. So I don't necessarily think you have to have this set idea of exactly who you are and what your purpose is to be able to be living a decent life. I think a bit like the confidence thing, rather than chasing confidence, it's sort of a byproduct. I think purpose is too, isn't it? When you just focus on, when I talk about, when I used to work in an inpatient ward with people who are kind of, really poorly, sometimes I would sort of take people outside to walk around the garden while we're talking and things. But sometimes I would go and do the washing up with someone. So people would drink cups of tea all day and leave them all on the side and everything. And while we were talking, we would help each other to wash up all these cups. And at the end of that conversation, you had this pile of clean cups, and you've done that for all of these people who don't feel that they can do it. And you know, these really small behaviors, you know, it's not huge world changing, you know, Nobel Prize winning contribution, but it still mattered, and it still shifted how that person felt in that day about whether that day had any purpose or whether they had made any significant contribution or brought any value to the people around them. And I think it's really, you know, life is built out of those tiny little increments. And if an experience that you had changes the way that you contribute, or small choices that you make day to day, you don't have to be, you know, retraining as a pilot and flying over with, you know, aid and things like that for that to be a sort of meaningful outcome of the situation. It could just make you a better person in your life today, and that would be enough.
That's
Beautifully said.
Pretty awesome way to wrap up. And sorry to end on a softball like that from Josh. We he's sort of known for that. But Dr. Julie Smith, that was so enlightening, so helpful. I know at least for the three of us, probably so helpful. So thank you for being our psychologist for the day. And I'm sure many more people would now count you as their psychologist. The book is called Open When, and it is so great, so helpful, so practical. So thank you for writing it.
Thank you. And thanks for having me on. Honestly, I'm not just saying this, it's probably one of the best podcast experiences ever. I just, and I'm definitely a new fan of the show, having kind of watched a few of them on YouTube now. I just, I'm hooked. I'm going to be watching them all now. So thanks so much for having me. I really appreciate it.
Oh, well, I'm really, after that, I'm really glad we had you on. As I seek confidence for the rest of the day. Thank you, Julie.
Thank you so much, Julie.
Thanks, guys.
If you enjoyed this episode, you'll love the Vulnerability Email. It's a weekly newsletter that helps you remain imperfect. Each week, we'll send you one vulnerable question inspired by the current episode to help you unpack your own imperfect life. Subscribe at www.theimperfects.com.au.